Come on, build a PC. Get together, have a few laughs.
Thanks for joining me, and today we're going to do a high-end build. So I had a local subscriber reach out to me and asked me to do a high-end build for him. His primary use case is gaming, but we're going to go through all the components here in a little bit and go through why I picked these components for him. All right, so let's get to it. So I'm not going to go in any particular order as normal. I'm just going to do it as a matter of convenience. So let's start with the little things. So two of the things that I wanted to get was the contact frame for an AM5 socket. Mostly because I'm not a big fan of the ILMs. It just feels more secure and a better quality build. And so contact frame from Thermalright. And then we got the thermal Grizzly KryoSheet. Thermal paste is perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with thermal paste. KryoSheets work just about as good, maybe a little bit better. It's also a lot cleaner. They're fragile, so you have to be very careful with these. I went with the KryoSheet mostly because I've got one in my build and my thermals have been fantastic, and I'm using a 13700K. And so with his CPU, the one that we picked, not going to be a problem, right, from a thermal standpoint. So I think the KryoSheet's probably the better way to go from a long-term maintenance standpoint. And then we went with, as the primary drive, the Samsung 990 Pro. It's a good drive, and it's been on sale for less than the 980 Pro prices. So right now, the price is pretty good for these. This is for straight storage, okay? We went with Western Digital 6 terabyte, 7200 RPM mechanical drive for a straight storage. And then for the RAM, we went with the G.Skill DDR5 Z5 Neo. And this is 6,000 megahertz with a cache latency of 30. I went with the 6,000 megahertz. For the CPU that we're going to use, the most stable RAM that we can get right now is the 6,000 megahertz. 6,400 megahertz you could probably get away with. But once you get beyond that, then depending on the motherboard you're using, the CPU you're using, and the RAM kit that you're using, you could have some stability issues. What he's going to use the PC for, this is more than plenty. So the 9800X3D is what I had picked out for him, and he and I agreed before the 9800X3D had rolled out. At first, I was thinking the 7950X or the 9950X, one of those two. But as we talked more and more, so that like his use case, like I said in the intro, is primarily gaming. It's probably, if I had to guess, like 80-85%, maybe even more of gaming. And apparently he's pretty good at competitive gaming. And so from a competitive gaming standpoint, you can't beat the 9800X3D. For the motherboard, we went with the MSI Mag X870 Tomahawk Wi-Fi. I've been a fan of the MSI boards for a while. I've got an MSI Tomahawk motherboard for my 13700K. It's easy to work with. The BIOS is pretty intuitive. The X870 is more than enough for what he needs. Again, his primary use case is for gaming, although he is planning on potentially recording some videos of his gameplay. Apparently he's that good. And so, you know, the 9800X3D, certainly not a top performer when it comes to content creation, but it doesn't do bad, right? I mean, it's a pretty decent performing CPU for that kind of stuff. Probably, I'd say like mid-tier, maybe upper mid-tier kind of thing. And since his primary focus isn't going to be content creation, it's going to be gaming, the 9800X3D just made the most sense. That's also why we got this 6 terabyte mechanical drive. Some of you probably scratching your head. Why the hell would you do that? Why didn't you just get another SSD? This was picked primarily for him to store videos that he creates, right? It's cost savings, and at the same time, it works just as fine. For the power supply, we went with another MSI, and I like the MSI power supplies. They have a color connector for the 12 volt high power connector, where you can see, if you see a seam of that color, I think it's yellow. If you see that color, then you know that you're not fully seated on that connector. So I like that. I'm kind of a fan of the MSI power supply. And this one is 1,000 watt. It's an 80 plus gold. It's ATX 3.1 and PCIe 5.1 ready. So yeah, it's a great power supply. So if you're in the market for fully modular power supplies and you want something that you can depend on for a while, MSI is not a bad way to go. All right, so for the CPU cooler, we went with Lian Hydroshift LCD 360. I'm kind of excited to build with this and the new motherboard and the 9800X3D, all latest gen hardware. All right, for the GPU, originally I had recommended that he get a 4070 Ti Super. That's all he really needed, right? It's a great GPU. It's at a decent price right now. You can find some for like just under $800 at this point. You find used ones for closer to about like $650 to $700. He felt that he was getting the best gaming CPU, and he wanted to get the 4090, and so he decided to get the Gigabyte 4090, which at this point was the lowest cost 4090 for $1,900 before tax. He didn't seem to mind. He was, and I can't blame him. I got a 4090 just because I wanted a 4090. And so, and I didn't need a 4090. I originally had gotten a 4070 Ti Super for that build. But then I got a 4090 right after that. And so I can't fault him for the fact that if he can afford it and he wants it, yeah. Great, good for him. I mean, if he doesn't care about the cost per frame and the fact that it costs as much as it costs, and he still wants the 4090, then, you know, get the 4090. Who am I to tell you not to get a Ferrari, right? So for the case, we went with the Antec Flux Pro, the black version, and I'm kind of excited to build in that because I haven't used that case, and the thermals on it are fantastic. One of the things that the subscriber had pointed out to me was that he didn't care about RGB and things like that. What he wanted was a fantastic performing PC, and the thermals and the cooling was fantastic as well, which is why I chose the Antec Flux Pro. It's still going to look pretty good. So that's pretty much it. These are the components that I chose for him because of his use case. And so now I guess now it's time to do the build. So let's get building. Okay, it looks like we're in. Looks like it's doing some memory training right now. All right, we're in the BIOS. Let's do the benchmark first with high settings, 1080p. I think this is at high settings, but it might be at medium settings. I don't know, sometimes the benchmark defaults to that for some reason. So we'll let it run and double check what the results are. All right, it is at high settings, so that's good. And we're at a little over 183 average FPS. All right, so we want to go for an average of a little over 180 in game. Well, that was interesting. This is all kinds of fucked up. Get out of the way. What the fuck is going on with this? That was some weird fucking mechanics right there. Now you see my health down on the bottom right? This is what happens when you get overpowered in a game. Here's a level 70 guy right here. He's doing nothing. Yeah. So yeah, bottom line, I'm capped out at 100 FPS. But yeah, I mean, look at my GPU. It barely hit 70%. Mostly it's in the 60s. Temperature's good for the GPU. I mean, it's at 30. It's like it's asleep. And the CPU is doing okay, I guess. All right, so let's do some other benchmarks. All right, 8K optimized for superposition for the 4090, which, you know, shouldn't be surprising that it'll do well. All right, so this PC was kind of fun to build, but it wasn't without its challenges. The build wasn't the challenge. It was the video production. I had so many issues. I don't even want to begin to list all the problems I ran into on video. Problems I never ran into before. It just snowballed, and it just seemed like one thing after another. Anyways, I'm just bitching now, so sorry about that. Overall, I'm pretty happy with the build. I was pretty happy with the case too. I mean, so one of the things about this case, it's a full-size tower, and one of the interesting things about it is that it has the panels on it are toolless, which is nice. It's nice and it's not nice. Okay, so the plus is that, you know, stuff just comes apart and it's easy to manage and things like that. The downside for me is that it's got these nubs in it, and sometimes if they don't go in just right, you know, if it feels, and you don't want to like slam it in there or anything like that. Other than it lowering the cost of the case because it lowers the cost of the production, I don't really see the upside on the toolless part, mostly because no matter what, you're going to need tools, right? Whether if it's for just the one thing for the GPU where you got to take out and put in screws, you're still going to have to use a tool, right? And if you already have the tool, then, you know, unless it's going to lower the cost of the case and because it lowers the cost of production, it's a nice touch, I guess, but I could take it or leave it, honestly. I kind of prefer the screws myself. I like taking, especially if they're captive screws. But other than that, I really like the case. The other couple of interesting things is that you kind of got to get the software for it, but right here is a display panel. And supposedly you can change it. I looked at the software and I couldn't really see where I can. It's not a very intuitive software. And so I'm not sure, maybe I'm just being a moron. If you guys know how to use the I think it's called iUnity. If you know how to use the iUnity software, let me know down in the comments. Anyways, the other thing is that you can actually take the power supply and side mount it, which supposedly is better for the flow, for the airflow. And then there's an internal power cord that you plug into the back of the power supply, and then you extend that over onto another panel that has the plug-in feature. As a matter of fact, here, let me show it to you. And it's nice and everything. It's I guess it's a good thought process, but I've got plenty of airflow underneath because I've got the intake fans right here, and I've got pretty decent perforation or porosity here and on the back side. And so with all that air coming in, and I've got this bottom half of the fan that's intaking, so with all that air that's coming in, I don't see how changing the direction of the exhaust of the power supply, because I think that's what the object is going to really help the airflow and cooling all that much more. And as a matter of fact, so there's a hard drive cage right here, but there's also two other cages on the side in the back. And so I didn't need that hard drive cage, so I removed that, and that just opened this entire area up other than where the power supply sits. And so, yeah, I didn't really see a need for this. It's a nice touch, I guess, but at the same time, you could have taken this cost and put that cost into, you know, the screws that I like. But again, that's just my personal taste. Anyways, the fans are pretty good. It came with 6 fans, 3 in the front, 2 in the bottom, and 1 in the back. There's plenty of room to work in, and plenty of room for cable management, things like that. Even in the back, the way they have all the Velcro straps and tie points and stuff made it pretty easy and fun to work with in order to cable manage everything. The GPU, the 4090, well, performs as expected. I mean, it's a 4090. So there's not a lot to say about that. I'm not a fan of the rainbow RGB for the fans and the Gigabyte logo. What would be nice is if this right here, the GeForce RTX, was lit up in white. Can't complain with the 4090 except for the price, but you know, that's another thing. The Hydroshift. The installation process was pretty straightforward. It was actually it's probably one of the easier AIO pumps that I've installed on a CPU, but it didn't require standoffs for the AM5 build. It does require standoffs for the LGA 1700 boards. I don't know if they need to make any kind of changes for the Arrow Lake sockets, LGA 1851, I think it's called. But yeah, the only difficult part was the hoses right here. They're pretty solid, but you gotta bend them in order to fit the way it's supposed to fit. It's a little tough, and if you've already got the motherboard in the case at the time, then you know, bending it in. Luckily, this top part, if you take these two screws out of the case, this thing lifts right up, and so it made it really easy to maneuver that and plug in the EPS cables for the motherboard. The AIO seems to be working well. I mean, the CPU right now is at 45 and the GPU is at 28. And so I do like the LCD display because you're able to change up what's showing. And so there's different settings. You have to get the L-Connect software for it, but there's different settings that you can put on it and different ways of showing certain information. Or you could put an image on there, or you could put a little animation on there. I think you might be able to put like a short movie clip in there. I was a little bit worried about this because I had read some reviews where the pump was DOA and some where the pump was like really loud, but it's not loud to me. And they were having problems with the software, and I didn't seem to have any problems with the software. The motherboard, a lot of it is toolless. There's a lock and unlock button for the GPU, which is nice. There's some toolless heat sinks for the M.2 slots, which is nice. I don't recall. And an extra bonus, they're now putting the debug LED on their upper end boards now, which is kind of nice to see again. The driver install, the chipset install went pretty quick and easy. The BIOS update went really fast, but it might be because it's just, you know, a fairly new board. One other thing I forgot to mention, the Gigabyte 4090 came with a GPU support. There's like 2 brackets that you got to install in order to facilitate it. I'm not going to talk about the power supply because the power supply is the power supply. All right, and then we got the G.Skill Trident Z5 Neo, the 6000 megahertz. So I set this at 6000 megahertz on AMD Expo Profile 1 in the BIOS, and it seems to be working perfectly fine. Yeah, the RAM seems to be working fine. The 990 Pro, it's pretty fast. I mean, it's pretty snappy. I was playing around with it and moving files and stuff to test it out. Yeah, it's doing pretty good. I'm pretty happy with the 990 Pro. Samsung always puts out a pretty good product when it comes to SSDs. The AM5 contact frame went in nice and smooth, really easy. Comes with screws and everything, even a little Allen key for those screws, and even some thermal paste. I would highly recommend contact frames, mostly because it creates a more even surface, right, for whatever CPU cooler you're putting on there. And then the KryoSheet, of course, pretty easy to work with. You just gotta slide it around with some. You gotta take some tweezers and put it on top of the CPU and then slide it around just a little bit at a time. Just make sure that if you slip for one reason or another on the CPU cooler install, you might want to take that back off and take a look at that KryoSheet to make sure it's still in the correct position. If not, then you need to reposition that, because if it's off, you're going to have hot spots on that CPU, and it's not going to perform as advertised for you. The 9800X3D, and as you saw in the benchmarks, performs as advertised. Does pretty well in Cyberpunk 2077 at 1080p native at ultra settings, and both the in-game and benchmarks. In-game FPS was actually better than the benchmarks. So, you know, the Cyberpunk benchmark. So it was interesting. The 9800X3D came out really good, and I think I said it earlier in the video when I was doing the benchmarks and stuff. I don't recall it going above 70 degrees Celsius. And overall, I think the subscriber that asked me to build this for him is going to be pretty happy with the results here. Other than that, hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you enjoyed some of the information I provided and the feedback as far as reviewing some of the components. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you in the next one.